Welcome back. This is Health and Healing, episode number 6, and today's topic is temperance. I'm your host, Dr. Michael Hess, and this program is brought to you by the Scott Valley Seventh-day Adventist Church. So before we get into today's topic, let's just do a quick review. We've been using the mnemonic New Start to organize our thinking about health and healing and help us remember all the parts. So we've covered NEW and S. So New Start, NEW, nutrition, exercise, water, and sunlight, which was what we covered last week. So in this episode, we're moving on to temperance. You'll notice that the word start has 2 T's. And in fact, I think that the 2 principles that start with T are probably the most important out of all of them. And we're going to save the best one for last. But today we're going to talk about temperance. And it's an interesting thing. It's kind of an old-fashioned word, not used a lot these days. And I have had discussions about temperance with quite a few people. Often people will say, well, moderation in everything. That's what we need to do. Just moderation in all things, and that'll be fine. That certainly is a popular view on temperance, but I'm going to have to say that the best I can say about that is woefully inadequate. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and give you my definition of temperance that I use, and then we're going to discuss some details about that, and then we'll jump into some research. So temperance is the virtue of exercising self-control so that I abstain from what is harmful and use what is good with moderation and balance. So you'll notice there that I referred to moderation, but I also mentioned that I abstain from things that are harmful, and I mentioned exercising self-control. So that you could think of, if you want a smaller mnemonic to remember temperance, the 3 parts would be self-control, abstinence, and moderation. So SAM, there you go. Self-control, abstinence, and moderation. So when I say abstain, a lot of people don't like that. They say, well, Doc, I don't drink that much. Just a little bit won't hurt me, right? Just a glass of wine with dinner. Or, well, I only smoke, I had less than a half pack a day. Or they'll mention whatever their favorite habit is. And first of all, I just have to say, well, the reality is a little bit of things that are harmful for you actually does harm you. Some extreme examples would be, well, would you like to have some HIV virus injected into your body? Just a little tiny bit? Probably not. Well, how about a little cyanide with your dinner? Just a little bit. No? Well, of course not, because you don't want to die. Well, the thing is that there are a lot of things that are harmful for us, and even in small amounts, they still cause harm. We're going to come back to talk about that a little bit more in a minute, but let's look at some specifics. And tonight specifically, I'm going to be looking at research about smoking and about alcohol use. So tobacco is very interesting. That if we look back in history, throughout most of the 1800s and even somewhat into the 1900s, many physicians recommended smoking tobacco as a treatment for lung disease. Can you believe that? With everything that we know now, it just seems totally absurd, but yet for many, many years, physicians recommended that this was a treatment. And so now we know better than that. But what about the current pandemic virus? Well, there was a study, a fairly large study, recently published by the British Medical Journal, and they showed that current smokers, compared to people who had never smoked, were 80% more likely to be hospitalized. And then in looking at the risk of death, they broke the smokers down into groups of less than a half pack a day, half pack to 1 pack a day, or pack a day or more. And what they found, for example, was that those people who smoked less than a half pack a day, so that's fewer than 10 cigarettes, they had more than double the risk of dying from the virus than people who had never smoked. And for those who smoked a pack a day or more, they had 6 times higher risk of dying. 6 times. So the relative risk was 6.11. And so if you understand, I'll put the link to the study in the description below so you can go look at the details there. But 6 times higher risk of dying. That is really incredible. And this, I don't know why we haven't been hearing this in the mainstream media. We're just hearing about the vaccine, the vaccine, the vaccine. But if people actually take responsibility for their health and quit smoking, they can reduce their risk exponentially. It's astounding. Now, you probably know that in general, smoking is not good for you, and there's been a lot of studies on that. There was a recent, well, it's relatively recent, it's almost 10 years ago, but a meta-analysis that looked at smoking and the risk of death for people who are 60 or older. A lot of the studies have been done in younger people, so this particular one, they looked at the risk in people 60 or older, and they found, again, current smokers were 80% more likely to die than non-smokers during the time that they looked at. And they found that no matter what age you are, smoking cessation reduces your risk of dying and reduces your risk for not only all-cause mortality, but cardiovascular disease, cancers, and lung disease. So even if you've been smoking for many years, and I've had people say this to me, well, I'm so old now, I'm too old to quit. That's not actually true. Any time that you can quit smoking, you will improve your health and reduce your risk of dying in any given time period, which means you'll live longer. Now, another practice that is an unhealthy practice that's very popular is drinking alcohol. And interestingly, the history of medicine and its relationship to alcohol is similar to that of tobacco. You've probably even heard that having a glass of wine with dinner will reduce your risk for heart disease. And in fact, many doctors said that through the 1900s and up into the 1990s. But the research, the actual medical research on that, when you look at the real science, not just the propaganda of the alcohol industry, when you look at the actual science, it turns out that that was just really a myth. There's many current studies now showing and stating specifically that there's no safe level of alcohol consumption. I'm going to put a couple of links in the description below. One particular study, this was done in Washington. The lead researcher said, I'm quoting, "Our findings are consistent with other recent research, which found clear and convincing correlations between drinking and premature death, cancer, and cardiovascular problems. Zero alcohol consumption minimizes the overall risk of health loss." So that's in looking at general health. Now, this is a recent study. This is what's called a preprint. It hasn't been printed in an official peer-reviewed journal yet, but as it was published or pre-released in May of this year, and this was a study looking at alcohol consumption and brain health, and what they found was that alcohol use, any alcohol use, was correlated with a decrease in brain mass. And now one of the big things in medicine now is looking at dementia and cognitive decline and decrease in brain function over time. And the study here, they found that there was a significant correlation. And not only was there a correlation, but the study's authors said that of the known risk factors for shrinking brain, alcohol was the largest identifiable factor. So what about alcohol and the current pandemic? Well, I mentioned this study in the very first episode, but I'll link it again in the description here on this episode. There was a study that looked at alcohol consumption and the risk of acute respiratory distress syndrome for people who got the virus that's going around right now. And what they found was a linear relationship. In other words, the more alcohol you drink, the higher your risk of acute respiratory distress syndrome. And they were able to basically do the math. When you have a linear relationship, it's relatively simple math, and they found about a 6% increase in risk for every drink that the person had during the week. So if your average is that you have a glass of wine every night, so that's 7 glasses of wine, so 7 times 6%, you're going to increase your risk quite a bit. Other people just maybe have 1 or 2 drinks, well, there's you're increasing your risk 6 or 12%. And some people have 10 or more, and they found that the correlation held all the way up to 10 or more drinks per week. So think of that, 10 drinks per week increases your risk for acute respiratory distress syndrome by 60%. That is quite significant. And the benefit or the way to eliminate that risk is simply stop drinking. And when you do that, you receive that benefit very quickly. So that's a couple of examples. Smoking and tobacco, you probably already know that those things aren't good for you. There's other things, we don't have time to cover all of them, but I do want to give you a way of thinking about it so that you can start to sort out some of these things for yourself. So how do we decide what we should avoid and what we should use moderately? Well, the way I think about it, the way I like to help people understand it is there are some things that our body uses naturally that we need to have. Those things we should use in moderation. And there are some things that our body does not use in any way and in fact are toxic or harmful to our body at any level. So for example, alcohol, any level of alcohol that you put in your body is toxic to whatever cells it comes in contact with, and your body sets about to eliminate that toxin as quickly as possible. So alcohol has no function in our body other than as a toxin. It does affect our body in multiple different ways, but any perceived benefits of alcohol we can get in a better, safer way with things that work in harmony with our physiology and actually promote health rather than disease. Contrast that with sugar, for example. The sugar is used by all the cells of our body as fuel, and in fact, if we don't have sugar in our body, we die. And so we have to have sugar. Now, of course, this is where the moderation and balance comes in. We should get the vast majority of the sugar in our body should come from whole plant food sources, which are mostly complex carbohydrates that our body then breaks down and turns into sugar. Some of those foods have sugar in them naturally, and that's fine. What we want to be careful of is processed sugars that have been extracted from those plants and run through a factory and then condensed into candy and pies and cakes and all those other good things that we love. So once again, the sugar itself is not toxic, but when it gets out of balance and concentrated in an unnatural way, then we need to be very careful with that, and we should consume less of that, maybe not cutting it out completely, but keeping it in balance and really emphasizing the most natural sources of sugar for most of our sugar intake. Does that make sense? I hope that's making sense to you. If you have any questions about that, please drop them in the comments below. I will respond to your questions. Another application of the principle of temperance is not only to substances that we put in our body, so whether that be drugs or different types of food or things like that, but also to behaviors. And those behaviors would include such things as gambling, pornography, shopping, exercise, and newer things like social media or playing video games. So for all of those behaviors, any behavior that you do, you can think about this. Does the behavior have some beneficial effects? Is it something that is good for us to do and that you need to do? And if that's the case, it should be done in moderation. So for example, shopping. We all need to purchase things because of the way society works. And that's not wrong, but we should keep that in balance. And of course, shopping has to do with your financial balance as well. Other behavioral things that people do really don't have any place in a healthy life. For example, pornography. There's really no place for that in a healthy life. So that should just be avoided completely. And that brings me to another principle, and the definition of temperance starts out with is the virtue of exercising self-control. So anything that causes you to lose your self-control and get caught up into compulsive behavior, addictive behavior, is something that needs to be either avoided and eliminated completely or controlled. Now, of course, if you could control it, then it wouldn't be an addiction, right? That's part of the problem. So if you're facing an addiction to something that otherwise might be fine, but you're using it compulsively, or you're doing the behavior compulsively, you're unable to control it, and it's actually interfering with a healthy balance in your life, then you need to stop that. And oftentimes that means you need to get some help. So I would just encourage you, if you have any kind of addiction in your life, some sort of behavior or substance that you're compelled to do or to use that you try to cut down or you try to stop and you just can't, get some help. So reach out to your doctor, find a good Christian counselor, or you can reach out to us here. We'll try to help you, put you in touch with some resources. But we really, in any kind of addiction, is not good and helpful for a healthy life. So we want to eliminate those. So that's it for today. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please leave them in the comments below. Again, if you find these videos to be helpful, please hit the subscribe button, like the video, share it with your friends. If you subscribe, you'll get notifications of our next video, which will be coming out next week. And next week, we're going to be talking about, did you remember the mnemonic? New Start. So we're at STA, sunshine, trust, temperance, and A, that must be air. We're going to be talking about air next week. Wow, that's a fun topic. Okay, so with that, I'll let you go. Be well and safe, and God bless you, and we'll see you next week.